Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for a true story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the human psyche. A story that unfolded in the heart of Cairo in 2009, specifically in the densely populated Giza Pyramids area, where the city breathes the hustle and bustle of life and streets are choked with people and cars. The spark of tragedy. In that year, on the bustling King Faisal Street, terrifying flames erupted from one of the towering apartment buildings. Thick smoke and raging fires seeped from every side. The scene was shocking. Dozens of passers-by and residents rushed, eyes widening in horror, hearts pounding in panic. The fire intensified with insane speed, and it seemed things were spiraling completely out of control. Immediately, voices escalated, frantic calls to emergency services. Fire trucks and police cars roared through the streets, rushing towards the crime scene. Yes, crime. Because what the next moments would reveal would defy all expectations. Fortunately, firefighters arrived just in time. Before the flames could engulf the entire building, they managed to control and extinguish the blaze. But the apartment had already turned to ash. Most of the belongings inside were completely destroyed. And most importantly, the woman in her 40s who resided in that apartment tragically lost her life in a horrific way. Unveiling the crime. Before leaving, firefighters conducted a routine inspection, but what they discovered transformed the disaster into a full-fledged criminal tragedy. This massive fire was no mere accident. It was a premeditated act, a deliberate act. Remnants of highly flammable fuel were found throughout the apartment, and specifically, on the victim's body. This discovery was pivotal and decisive. Investigators found themselves facing a horrific murder case, and now it was their duty to identify the terrifying individual who committed this crime and left behind such immense destruction. Who could this person be? What was their relationship to the victim? And how would the details of this case shock Egyptian society when they became public? To find the answers to all these questions, let's step together into the crypt. Music intensifies with tension and excitement. Initial clues and the shocking report. Immediately, investigators sent the victim's body to the forensic laboratory to determine the cause and time of death. And they didn't sit idly by. They began interrogating a number of the victim's neighbors in a desperate attempt to understand her lifestyle. Perhaps that would help them unravel the mysteries of this strange crime. Through questioning the neighbors, investigators learned that the victim was a widowed woman named Sabira, aged 45. She lived alone in the apartment after the death of her wealthy husband, who owned many properties in the Giza Pyramids area. But most importantly, what the neighbors mentioned was that Sabira had a nephew, a 26-year-old young man named Walid. Walid ran a fresh juice shop on the same street, and he would visit his Aunt Sabira from time to check on her and help her with difficult tasks. And here, eyewitnesses indicated that Walid was the last person they saw leaving the victim's apartment, a short time before the fire broke out. Based on that, Walid became the primary suspect. But the forensic lab report, issued a few days later, shocked everyone. It made investigators doubt that Walid was the perpetrator who took his aunt's life in such a brutal way. The report clarified that Sabira was already dead when the fire started. This meant that burning the apartment and the body was nothing but a desperate attempt by the perpetrator to destroy all evidence. As for the main cause of death, the report indicated that the victim was subjected to extremely violent strangulation, to the extent that some bones in her neck were crushed. She also suffered more than 20 stab wounds with a knife, even though she was already dead at the time. But it was clear that the perpetrator wanted to ensure her death in the most horrific way before leaving the crime scene. A shocking revelation, and an unexpected motive. But the most important information mentioned in the forensic lab report, which later led investigators to rule Walid out as a primary suspect, was that the victim had been subjected to violent sexual assault multiple times before her brutal demise. It made no sense for investigators that Walid would commit such an act against his aunt. However, despite being ruled out as a primary suspect, investigators remained suspicious of Walid's connection to what happened to his aunt. Even if he was innocent of her death, he at least knew some crucial information about exactly what transpired in Sabira's apartment on the day of the incident. Therefore, a team of police officers went to Walid's residence to interrogate him. As soon as Walid saw the police standing before him, he became visibly agitated and nervous. And even before they began questioning him, Walid told them that he was ready to confess all the details of his heinous crime. A crime he felt shame and disgrace for. Perhaps this shame was what drove him to confess with such chilling ease. Roots of evil and poisoned ambition. Walid explained to investigators that the story began about 10 years prior, specifically in 1998. At that time, Walid was still a young man, working as a simple laborer in his hometown in Kalubia Governorate, near Cairo. But Walid was an ambitious young man, and that simple profession was not enough to satisfy his passion and obsession with immense wealth. Therefore, he decided to travel to the largest capital in the Arab world, where he would be able to find better job opportunities. And naturally, he would have the chance to develop his business and wealth, and perhaps one day become a major, wealthy merchant. Initially, Walid's family hesitated about the young man traveling alone to a large and crowded city like Cairo, but his parents' repeated rejections did not deter him. He eventually managed to convince them of his viewpoint after assuring them that he would be in constant contact with his aunt Sabira, and that he would choose accommodation near her home to be close to her at all times. This made Walid's parents somewhat more at ease about their son leaving home, so they reluctantly agreed to Walid's move to Cairo. In turn, Sabira had moved to live in the Egyptian capital in 1993 after marrying a wealthy merchant who was almost 25 years older than her. When Walid arrived in Cairo, Sabira and her husband welcomed him warmly, and his aunt's husband helped him rent a small room located on Faisal Street near Sabira and her husband's home. Seeds of corruption and hidden thefts. At the beginning of his journey in the capital, Walid worked as a street vendor. Although he didn't earn much from this work, Walid, by adopting a very frugal and simple lifestyle, managed to save some money, as his dream of owning his own business continued to grow within him. After a period of moving to Cairo, Walid succeeded in finding work at a shop specializing in selling fresh juices. Gradually, Walid proved his worth and competence in his new workplace, and he quickly became one of the most important employees in the entire shop. The shop owner came to rely on him for almost every small and large detail. And here, the disaster began to take shape. Walid exploited the shop owner's trust to defraud the man and earn more money through illegal means. And because he managed all the details of the shop, no one ever suspected Walid's repeated thefts from the shop. After several years of working at that shop, Walid became an expert in this type of business. Greed escalates and blackmail begins, but it didn't stop there. Walid approached his wealthy aunt's husband and suggested that he partner with him to open his own juice shop. He indicated that his years of experience in that field would guarantee them resounding success, and Walid possessed persuasive skills bordering on talent. It only took a few minutes for his aunt's husband to be convinced by the idea and agree to fully finance the project. Walid was tasked with finding the suitable location for opening and furnishing the shop completely. His aunt's husband did not interfere, not even by offering an opinion, as the wealthy merchant was busy with his other businesses and simply received his monthly share of the profits without delving into any details. This allowed Walid the opportunity to tamper with the profit records and hide a significant portion of them from his aunt's husband. In 2006, Walid had finally achieved his dream and owned his own business. But that dream quickly became threatened when his aunt's husband's health suddenly deteriorated, and his family was forced to take him to the hospital. Walid knew very well that he would suffer many problems and crises if his aunt's husband died, mainly because the man had many heirs. And undoubtedly, these heirs would demand their share of the profits, and some might even go so far as to interfere in the management, or demand that Walid allow them to inspect the shop's financial records, threatening to expose all the thefts he had committed since he began managing that project several years prior. After careful consideration, Walid came up with a diabolical idea. Immediately after his aunt's husband was discharged from the hospital, the young man approached his aunt and began trying to convince her to ask her husband to register his share in the shop under her name. Walid justified this request by expressing his fear of the elderly man's sudden death, which would force his aunt to deal with his heirs, who were not on good terms with her. Although she was convinced by Walid's idea, Sabira thought it was not the right time to discuss this matter with her husband, as the man had just miraculously survived a severe heart attack. But she was surprised when Walid threatened her with a dangerous secret. A secret that could cost her her life. At that time, Sabira did not know that her nephew had observed her life enough to know that she was cheating on her husband with multiple people, and that these individuals would visit her home almost routinely when her husband was absent. Naturally, Walid did not hesitate to threaten his aunt with exposing her secret to her husband and her entire family if she did not comply with his orders. Ultimately, Sabira managed to reach a peace agreement with her nephew, especially after she managed to convince her husband to register his share in the shop under her name, and guaranteed Walid that he would continue to manage the business alone and tamper with the accounts as he pleased, while she simply received her monthly share of the profits. The devil takes hold, and the horrific crime. Only a short time after that agreement, Sabira's husband passed away due to entirely natural causes. The man was old and suffering from several chronic illnesses, so his death was not a surprise to any of his close ones. After her husband's death, Sabira found greater freedom to pursue her illicit relationships. In turn, Walid continued to manage the juice shop in the same manner. Things were going well for him and his aunt, but soon Walid's inner devil would disturb this tranquility, leading to that horrific crime. In early 2009, Walid began to grow angry at those men who visited his aunt's home and did what they did with her. He started to think that he was no less a man than them. This thinking led him to feel an overwhelming desire to obtain that forbidden pleasure they were getting from his aunt. One fateful morning, Walid went to his aunt's house. After sitting in the living room, he rudely asked her to follow him to the bedroom, making his intentions clear without any shame. At first, Sabira thought Walid was joking, but he quickly proved her wrong, glaring at her menacingly before pouncing on her, assaulting her, and threatening to kill her if she didn't comply with his orders. Sabira feared that Walid would carry out his threat, especially since his gaze implied his determination to proceed with his desires. So she had no choice but to follow him to the room and follow his instructions to the letter. After he finished what they were doing, he returned to the living room and sat in silence, neither of them speaking to the other. After a while, Walid asked his aunt to accompany him to the bedroom again to repeat the act. The woman complied once more without hesitation. After satisfying his lust and clearing his mind, Walid began to contemplate the consequences of what he had just done. He feared that his aunt would expose him to his family or report him to the police station. Therefore, at that moment, he made his decision to get rid of Sabira, to bury his filthy secret with her. Walid tied up his aunt, who began to cry and beg him for mercy, promising him that she would never tell anyone what had happened between them. But Walid was determined. Sabira's pleas would not deter him from strangling her to death. Before he pulled out a knife and began stabbing her dozens of times to ensure her death. Finally, he looted the victim's belongings, set fire to her house and fled quickly. The killer's end and societal breakdown. Following these detailed confessions made by Walid, he was referred to trial. He was quickly convicted on several charges, most notably premeditated murder, and ultimately received a sentence of death by hanging. Music fades out gradually, with a poignant sound at the end. What do you think about the impact of greed and moral corruption on the breakdown of family relationships and society? Share your opinions and experiences in the comments below.